coming to our devised adaptation of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Normally, this is the part where the director comes up and gives a pre-show speech, but this process is so unique in that it's entirely collaborative, so we didn't have any directors, so it's just us.
Yeah, this entire show was put together by our student ensemble and technical team, and was conceived, casted, created, devised, written, rehearsed, memorized, tech, and will now open and close in less than 3 weeks.
Jake and I have been wanting to devise a piece for a really long time, and we arrived at this story that we love, and we hope you'll love it too.
Yes, so the show runs 65 minutes with no intermission, and we have a few things for you to keep in mind.
This piece contains themes of suicide and suicidal ideation, as well as the use of jarring lighting and sound elements, including strobing and loud, abrupt noise.
Please keep in mind that actors will be moving throughout the space, so keep all personal belongings free from all of the aisles, and avoid touching any lighting equipment as it is expensive and really, really hot. Please take time to turn off your phones. It's only an hour. And note that the emergency exit is just this way and up the stairs.
After the show ends, we'll also have a brief 15-minute talk back where you can ask any questions you might have to our ensemble and the creative team. Thanks again for coming to see the show, and we hope you enjoy it.
Oh, did you ever remark that door, Utterson? It's connected in my mind with a very odd story.
And what was that?
Well, I was coming back from someplace at the edge of the world about 3 o'clock of a cold winter morning. Street after street, all the folks asleep. Street after street, all as quiet as a church. Till I got into that state of mind where a man just listens and listens. Well, all at once, I saw 2 figures. One, a small man stumping along, and the other, a child of about 8 or 10, running as fast as she could down a cross street. Well, sir, the 2 ran into each other, naturally enough, at the corner. And then came the horrible part of the thing, for the man just trampled calmly over the girl and left her screaming in the street. It was hellish to see. I took to my heels, collared the gentleman, and brought him back to where there was already quite a group forming about the child. He was cool and made no resistance, except to give me one look, so evil that it brought out the sweat on me. It was the most hateful circle of faces I'd ever seen, and there was the man in the middle. The sort of black, sneering coolness, frightened too, I could tell, but carrying it off, sir, really like Satan.
If you wish to make capital of this incident, I am naturally helpless. No gentleman but wishes to avoid a scene. Name your figure.
Well, we screwed him up to £100 for the child's family. The next matter was to get them leave. Where do you think he took us but to the place with the door? Opened it, and presently came back with a check. Signed with a name that I can't mention, though it is one of the parts of my story, but it's a name very well regarded nonetheless. It's worth more than that, if only the check was genuine. I took the liberty to point out to the gentleman that a man does not, at 4 in the morning, go into a cellar door and come back with a check signed with another man's name, but he was quite easy in sneering.
Set your mind at ease. I will wait with you till the bank's open and cash the check myself.
So we set off, went to my chambers, and in the morning, went to the bank. I turned in the check myself, and told them I had every right to believe it was a forgery, but not a bit of it. The check was genuine.
Oh, tut, tut.
Yes, it's a bad story. And the man was horrible, a damnable man, really, the sort of man that no one should have to do with. And the gentleman on the check is celebrated, too. Blackmail, I suppose. An honest man paying through the nose for the capers of his youth, though even that is far from explaining it all.
And you don't know if the drawer of the check lives there.
Likely place, isn't it? But I did take note of his address. He lives in some square or other.
And you never asked about the place with the door?
No, but I've observed the place myself. There's no other door, and no one goes in or out of that one but once in a great while, the gentleman. There are 3 windows. The windows are always shut, but they're clean. And there's a chimney, which is generally smoking, so somebody must live there.
But for all that, there's one point I want to ask. I want to ask the name of that man that walked over the child.
Well, it was a man by the name of Hyde.
What sort of man is he to see?
He's not easy to describe. There's something wrong with him. Something displeasing, something downright detestable. And yet, he's impossible to describe, though not for want of memory, for I swear I can see him in this moment.
You are sure he used the key? I know it must seem strange. The fact is, if I do not ask you the name of the other party, it's because I know it all. You see, Richard, your tale has gone home. If you have been inexact at any point, you had better correct it.
Yes, he had a key, and what's more, he still has it. I saw him use it not a week ago. I'm ashamed of my long tongue. Let us agree to never speak of this again.
With all my heart, I shake hands on that, Richard.
Mr. Utterson had several months prior been entrusted with the most unusual will with his friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll.
The document was kept in the most private part of his personal safe.
Dr. Jekyll's will offended Mr. Utterson's sense of reason, for it provided...
In the case of the decease of Henry Jekyll, MD, DCL, LLD, FRS, and etc., all his possessions are to pass into the hands of his friend and benefactor, Edward Hyde. Or in that case, of Dr. Jekyll's disappearance or unexplained absence for any period exceeding 3 calendar months, the said Edward Hyde is to step into the said Henry Jekyll's shoes without delay and free from any burden or obligation.
I thought it was madness. Now I begin to fear it is disgrace. If anyone knows, it would be Lana. I suppose, Lana, that you and I must be the 2 oldest friends Henry Jekyll has.
I wish the friends were younger.
Oh, but I suppose we are. And what of that? I see very little of him now.
I thought you had a bond of common interest.
Oh, we had. But it's been more than 10 years since Henry Jekyll became too fanciful for me. He began to go wrong. Wrong in the mind. And though, of course, I continue to keep up with him for old sake's sake, I see and have seen devilish little of the man. Such unscientific balderdash would have estranged Damon and Pythias.
Did you ever come across a protege of his? One Hyde?
Hyde. No. Never heard of him.
he be Mr. Hyde?
I shall be Mr. Seek. Mr. Hyde, I think.
That is my name. What do you want?
I see you were going in. I am an old friend of Dr. Jekyll's, Mr. Utterson of Gaunt Street. You must have heard of my name. In meeting you so conveniently, I thought you might admit me.
You will not find Dr. Jekyll. He's from home. How did you know me?
On your side. Will you do me a favor?
With pleasure.
Will you let me see your face? Now I shall know you again.
It is as well as we have met. You should have my address. And how did you know me?
By description,
Whose description?
we have common friends.
Common friends. Who are they?
Jekyll, for instance.
He would not have told you. I did not think he would have lied.
That is not human language. There must be something else.
There is something else.
If I could find a name for it. The man seems hardly human. Poor old Henry Jekyll. If I've ever read Satan's signature upon a face, it is on that of your new friend. Dr. Jekyll at home, please.
Dr. Jekyll has gone out.
Come in. I saw Mr. Hyde go in by the old dissecting room door, Poole. Is that right, when Dr. Jekyll is from home?
Quite right, sir. Mr. Hyde is here.
You don't believe I ever met this Mr. Hyde?
No, sir. He never dines here. He mostly comes and goes by the laboratory. In fact, we never see him on this side of the house.
Well, good night.
Good night, Mr. Utterson.
Poor Jekyll. He's in deep waters. He was wild when he was young, a long while ago to be sure. But in the law of God, there is no statute of limitations. It must be that. The ghost of some old sin, the cancer of some concealed disgrace. Years after memory has forgotten and self-love condoned the fault. This Master Hyde, if he were studied, he must have secrets of his own. Secrets compared to which poor Jekyll's worst would be like sunshine. Things cannot continue as they are. It turns me cold to think of this creature stealing like a thief at Henry's bedside. Oh, poor Henry, what awakening. And the danger of it. For if this Hyde suspects the existence of the will, he may grow impatient to inherit. I must put my shoulder to the wheel, if Jekyll will but let me.
If Jekyll will only let me. So good to see you.
Wreck, isn't it?
speak to you, Jekyll. You know that will of yours.
My poor Utterson, I never saw a man so distressed as you were by my will. Unless it were that hidebound purist Lanyon at what he calls my scientific heresies. Oh, I know he's a good fellow, you needn't frown. But an ignorant, blatant purist. I was never more disappointed in any man.
You know I never approved of it.
My will. Yes, certainly, I know that. You've told me so.
Well, I tell you so again. I've been learning something about Hyde.
This is a matter I thought we agreed to drop.
What I heard was abominable.
You do not understand my position. I'm painfully situated, Utterson. My position is a very strange one. It's not one of those affairs that can be mended by talking.
Jekyll, you know me. I'm a man to be trusted. Make no doubt I can get you out of it.
Utterson, that is downright good. And I trust you before any man alive, before myself, even if I had that choice. But it's not as bad as you fancy. And just to put your good heart to rest, I can tell you one thing. The moment I choose, I can be rid of Mr. Hyde. I give you my hand on that, and I thank you again and again, and I will just add one word. This is a private matter. And I beg of you, let it sleep.
I have no doubt you are perfectly right.
There is one thing I should like you to understand. I take really a very good interest in poor Hyde. I know you've met him, he told me so, and, well, I fear he was rude. I do take a very good interest in him, and if I'm taken away, Utterson, I want you to bear with him and give him his rights. It would be a great weight off my mind.
I can't pretend I should ever like him.
I don't ask that. I only ask for justice. I only ask you to help him for my sake, when I'm no longer here.
I promise. Yes, I recognize him. I'm sorry to say, this is Sir Danvers Carey.
Good God.
It was 2 o'clock when I came to myself and called for the police, but the murderer was long gone. There lay his victim on the ground, mangled. The stick with which the deed had been done, though it was tough and heavy wood, it had broken in the middle under the stress of this cruelty, and then one splintered half rolled into the neighboring gutter.
The other, no doubt, had been carried away by the murderer. A purse and gold watch were found upon the victim. No cards or papers, except, of course, a sealed and stamped envelope, which he'd probably been carrying to the post, and which I brought you this morning. This will make a deal of noise, and perhaps you can help us to the man?
Is this Mr. Hyde a person of small stature?
Particularly small and particularly wicked looking.
If you'll come with me, I think I can take you to his house. this the residence of a Mr. Hyde?
Yes. But he is not at home. He was here very late last night, but gone again within the hour. Not very unusual for him. His habits are quite odd. But I've never seen him since last month until last night.
Well, then we wish to see his room.
Impossible.
I had better tell you, this is Inspector Newcomer.
Of Scotland Yard. He's in trouble. What's he done?
He doesn't seem to be a very popular character. Just let me and the gentleman have a look about. You may depend upon it, sir. I have him in my hand. Why, he must have lost his head, or he never would have left half the broken stick here. Or by that matter, burned the checkbook. Why, money is life to the man. We have nothing to do but wait for him at the bank and get out the handbills.
Good luck.
What's that?
I've only seen him twice. His family nowhere to be traced. He's never been photographed. And those who can describe him differ wildly, as common observers will. Only on one point were they agreed, and that is the haunting sense of unexpressed deformity with which the fugitive impresses his beholders.
So you have heard the news.
They were crying it in the square. I heard them at my dining room.
Carew was my client, but so are you. And I want to know what I'm doing. You haven't been mad enough to hide this fellow?
Utterson, I swear to God, I'll never set eyes on him again. I'm done with him in this world, and indeed, he does not want my help. You don't know him as I do. He shall never more be heard of.
For your sake, I hope you may be right. If it came to a trial, your name might appear.
I'm quite sure of him. But there is one thing. I have received a letter. I'm at an odds as to whether I should show it to the police. I should like to leave it in your hands. I have so great a trust in you.
You fear it might lead to his detection.
No. No, I'm quite done with him. I was thinking of my own character. Which this hateful business is rather exposed.
Well, then let me see the letter. Edward Hyde. Have you the envelope?
I burned it. But it bore no postmark. The note was handed in.
Shall I keep this and sleep on it?
Judge for me entirely. I've lost confidence in myself.
It was Hyde who dictated the terms in your will about that disappearance. I knew it. He meant to murder you. You had to find escape.
I've had a lesson. God. What a lesson I've had.
There was a letter handed in today. What was the messenger about?
Nothing has come today, except by post and only circulars by that.
It must have come by the laboratory. This is a sad business about Sir Dan.
Yes. The man, of course, was mad.
I have a document here in his handwriting. It is between ourselves, but there it is. Fighting your way a murderer's autograph.
Not mad, but it is an odd autograph.
And a very odd writing.
Is that from Dr. Jekyll? I couldn't help but recognize the handwriting.
You want to see it?
Thank you. Very interesting.
Why did you compare them?
Well, there's a singular resemblance between the two. The autographs are in many ways identical, only differently sloped.
Rather quaint.
It is, as you say, rather quaint.
I wouldn't speak of this note.
No, I understand.
Henry Jekyll. Forged for a murderer.
I just love it at the party.
You are
Cheers.
Dr. Jekyll, the doctor is confined to the house and will see no one. The doctor is confined to the house and will see no one. The house.
Doctor.
The doctor.
Confined to the house.
No one will see.
Will
The
see
doctor
no one.
will see.
No one.
And
To the
no
house.
one will see the doctor.
Confined.
Confined
The
the
doctor.
doctor to the
The
house.
No one.
The
No
doctor
one.
is no one.
Confined.
No one is the doctor.
No one.
The house will see no
No
one.
one. Doctor.
The doctor
The
will
house.
see
Confined.
no one. No one. No one.
One. One. One. I have had a shock, and I shall never recover. It is a question of weeks. Well, life was pleasant. Yes. I liked it. Yes, sir, I liked it. I used to like it. I sometimes think if we all knew, we should be more glad to get away.
Jekyll is ill too. Have you seen him?
I wish to see or hear no more of Dr. Jekyll. I am quite done with that person, and I beg that you spare me any allusion to one whom I regard as dead.
We are three very old friends, Lane. We shall not live to make others.
Nothing can be done. Ask himself.
He will not see him.
I am not surprised at that. After I am dead, you may come to learn the right and wrong of this matter, for I cannot tell you, but in the meantime, if you can stay and talk with me of other things, I beg you do so, but if you cannot keep clear of this accursed topic, then in God's name, go! for I cannot bear it.
I write to you, Jekyll, in the state of extreme agitation. Not only because it has been 7 days since the expulsion from your house, but because of the recent death of our dear friend, Lana. In his final moments, he wished not to see or hear of you whatsoever, to the point of already regarding you as dead. Therefore, my greatest cause for agitation is the reason for that unhappy break between you and our dear, late lady.
My dear Utterson, I do not blame our friend, but I share his view. I mean from henceforth to lead a life of extreme solitude. You must not worry, nor must you doubt my friendship if my door is often shut, even to you. I have brought on myself a punishment and a danger that I cannot name. If I am the chief of sinners, then I am the chief of sufferers also. I could not think that this earth contained a place for such sufferings and terrors. You can do one thing to lighten my destiny, and that is to respect my silence.
Private. For the hands of G.J. Utterson alone, and in case of his predecease, to be destroyed unread. Not to be opened till the death or disappearance of Dr. Henry Jekyll.
Again, the idea of a disappearance in the name of Jekyll. But in the will, that idea had sprung from the suggestion of Hyde. Written in the hand of Lana, what should it mean? A great curiosity. It is one thing to mortify curiosity, another to conquer it.
Following Sunday, Utterson and Enfield's walk led them past Hyde's door once more.
Well, that's the end of that story. We shall never again see Mr. Hyde.
I hope not. Did I ever tell you I once saw him and shared your feeling of repulsion?
Well, it's impossible to have one without the other. And by the way, what an ass you must have thought me not to know that this was a back way to Dr. Jekyll's. Lucky I found it out when I did, even without your help.
So found it out, did you? But if that be the case, we may step into the court and take a look at the windows. To tell you the truth, I am uneasy about poor Jekyll and feel even outside as if the presence of a friend might do him good. Jekyll, I trust you're better.
I'm low, Utterson. Very low indeed, but it will not last long, thank God.
You stay too much indoors. You should be out whipping up the circulation like Mr. Enfield and me. Come now, get your hat and take a quick turn with us.
I should like to very much, but I dare not. It's simply impossible. But indeed, Mr. Utterson, I am very glad to see you. I would ask you and Mr. Enfield up, but, well, the place really isn't fit.
Then the best thing we can do is to stay down here and speak with you from where we are.
That is just what I was about to venture to propose.
Dr. Jekyll. And upon the reading of this letter, I came to the conclusion that my colleague was insane. He requested the immediate retrieval of a very certain drawer from his private laboratory. An appeal worded so greatly could not be set aside without such a responsibility, so I rose accordingly and drove straight to Jekyll's house. There, the butler was awaiting my arrival. The safe door was very strong, the lock excellent. But after 2 hours' work, the door stood open. Here I proceeded to examine its contents. I found what seemed to me a simple crystalline salt of a white color, a phial, about half full of blood-red liquor, other ingredients I could make no guess, and a book, which contained little but a series of dates. Here and there, a date was appended with a word, usually no more than a single word, the word double, occurring perhaps 6 times in a total of several hundred entries, once very early in the list, and followed by several exclamations. Total failure! Here was a series of records of experiments that had led, like too many of Dr. Jekyll's investigations, to no end of practical usefulness. 12 o'clock rung scarce out over London, ere the knocker sounded very gently on the door. I myself went to the summons and found a small man crouching against the pillars at the portico. Are you come from Dr. Jekyll?
Yes. Have you got it?
Oh, come, sir. You forget I have not yet the pleasure of your acquaintance. Be seated, if you please.
I beg your pardon.
My impatience has shown its heels to my politeness. I come here at the instance of your colleague, Dr. Henry Jekyll, on some business of some moment, and I understand the drawer.
Yes, sir. There it is. Calm yourself.
And now, will you suffer me to take this glass in my hand and to go forth from your house without future calling? Or has the greed of curiosity too much command of you? Think before you answer. As you decide, you shall be left as you were before, neither richer nor wiser, unless the sense of service rendered to a man in mortal distress may be counted as a kind of riches of the soul, or, if you shall so prefer to choose, a new province of knowledge, new avenues to fame and power shall be laid open to you here in this room upon the instant, and your sight shall be blasted by a prodigy to stagger the unbelief of Satan.
Sir, you speak enigmas, and you will perhaps not wonder that I hear you with no very strong impression of belief. But I have gone too far in the way of inexplicable services to pause before I see the end.
It is well. Remember your vows. What follows is under the seal of our profession. And now you who have so long been bound to the most narrow and material views, you who have denied the virtue of transcendental medicine, you who have derided your superiors, behold.
I saw what I saw, and I heard what I heard, and yet my soul sickened at it. And yet even now, when that image fades from my mind, I ask myself if I believe it, and I cannot answer. Oh God! Oh God!
I got your message full and came as quickly as I could. I heard rumblings of Jekyll's disappearance, but never thought I would have valid reason to break the seal of Landon's letters. Do you suspect these incidents to be true?
I think there's been foul play.
Foul play? What foul play? What do you mean?
I daren't say, sir, but along with
me and see for yourself. Come as gently as you can. And if for any reason he would ask you to go in, don't go. Mr. Edison, sir, asking to see you.
Tell him I will see no one.
Thank you, sir. Is that my master's voice?
It seems much changed.
Changed? Yes, I think so. Have I been 20 years in my master's house? For me to not recognize his voice? No, master's been made away with. Who is in there instead of him?
Supposing Dr. Jekyll to have been murdered, what could induce the murderer to stay? That won't hold water.
All this last week, he's been crying out night and day for some sort of medicine, but he cannot get it to his mind. And it was sometimes his way, the master's, to write his orders on a sheet of paper and throw it on the stair. And every day this week, we've had nothing but papers and a closed door. Every day there have been orders and complaints. I've been sent flying to all the wholesale chemists in town, and then I bring the stuff back and there's another paper telling me to return it because it's impure. This drug is wanted bitter, bad, sir, whatever for. The importance of this to Dr. Jekyll can hardly be exaggerated.
Have you seen him?
I've seen him. He came suddenly into the room. And when I stepped in, he saw me. He gave a kind of cry and he whipped upstairs. It was but for a minute that I saw him, but it made my hair stand upon my head like quills. Sir, if that was my master, why had he a mask upon his face? Why did he cry out and run from me? And then
I think your master is plainly seized with one of those maladies that both torture and deform the sufferer. The alteration of his voice, the mask and the avoidance of his friends. Hence his eagerness to find this drug and by which the poor soul retains some hope of ultimate recovery. It is a sad enough pull, but that explanation is plain, natural, and it hangs well together.
no, sir. That thing is not my master, and there's the truth. Do you think I would not know him after 20 years? No. God knows what that thing in the mask is, but it was never Dr. Jekyll. My belief there was murder done.
Much as I am puzzled, I shall consider it my duty to break in that door. This masked figure that you saw, did you recognize it?
It was moving so quick, I could hardly swear to that. But I think it was Mr. Hyde. It had the same quick, light way with it. And then who else could have gotten in by the laboratory door? And Mr. Hyde still had the key at the time of the murder. Have you ever met this Mr. Hyde?
Once.
Then you know. There's something about that gentleman, something that gives you a turn, something that makes you feel kind of cold and thin.
I own that I felt something of what you described.
Oh, when that masked thing jumped from among the chemicals, it went down my spine like ice. And I know that's not evidence, but I have my feelings.
My fears inclined to the same point. I believe Henry is killed. If all is well, my shoulders are broad enough to bear the blame. Is there anything else?
Once I heard it weeping, like a lost soul. And I came away with that upon my heart that I could have wept too.
Jekyll, I demand to see you. I give you fair warning, our suspicions are aroused. And I must and shall see you. If not by fair means, then by foul. If not by your consent, then by brute force.
My soul,
Stop it. Jumped.
and I couldn't hear. I saw, and I heard what I heard.
The final confession of Henry Jekyll.
Man is not truly one, but truly two.
It came about that I concealed my pleasures. and that when I had reached the years of reflection and took stock of my progress and position in the world, I stood already committed to a profound duplicity of life. Both sides of me were in dead earnest. I was no more myself when I laid aside restraint and plunged in shame than when I labored at the furtherance of knowledge or the relief of sorrow and suffering. I have been doomed to such a dreadful shipwreck. Man is not truly one, but truly two. If each, I told myself, could be but housed in separate identities, then life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust could go in his way, free from the aspirations and burdens of his more upright twin. And the just could walk steadfastly and securely on his upward path, doing good things in which he found his pleasure, and free from this extraneous evil. It was the curse of mankind that these two were thus bound together, that in the agonized womb of consciousness, they would be constantly struggling. For two good reasons, I will not delve too deeply into the scientific branch of my confession. First, because, as I have been made to learn, the doom and burden of our lives is bound forever on men's shoulders. And if an attempt is made to cast it off, it but returns upon us with a more awful and senile pressure. Second, because, as my narrative will make, alas, too evident, my discoveries were incomplete. The temptation of a discovery so profound and singular at last overcame my suggestions of alarm. I had long since prepared my potion. I purchased a large quantity of a particular salt, compounded the elements and watched them boil and smoke together, and then drank off the potion. The most racking pain succeeded, a grinding in the bones, a deadly nausea, and a horror that cannot be exceeded at the hour of birth or death. There was something strange in my sensations, something indescribably new, and from its very novelty, incredibly sweet. I felt younger, lighter, happier in my body. I was conscious of a heady recklessness, a solution to the bonds of obligation. I felt myself at that very first breath of that new life to be more evil. Tenfold more evil, a captive to my original sin. I saw at once the first impression of Edward Hyde. The evil side to my nature was less robust than the good side which I had just deposed. It had left on that body a mark of deformity and decay, and yet when I looked upon that ugly idol, I felt no repugnation. It was simply a leap of welcome. This too was myself. It seemed natural and human. I lingered but a moment at the mirror. My second and more conclusive experiment had yet to be attempted. It yet remained to be seen if I had lost my identity beyond redemption. I prepared and drank the cup once more and came to myself with the stature, face of Henry Jekyll. My new power tempted me until I fell. I had to but drink the cup, to doff at once the body of the old professor, and to put on like a thick cloak that of Edward Hyde. I took and furnished that house in Soho, to which Hyde was tracked by the police, and employed as a housekeeper a creature whom I knew well to be silent and unscrupulous. On the other side, I announced to my staff that a Mr. Hyde, whom I described, was to have full liberty and power about my house in the square. And to parry, perhaps, I drew up that will, to which Utterson so much objected that should anything happen to me in the body of Dr. Jekyll, I should be able to step into that of Edward Hyde without loss. Dr. Jekyll stood at times aghast before the acts of Edward Hyde. But the situation was apart from ordinary laws. It insidiously relaxed the grasp of conscience. It was Hyde, after all, and Hyde alone that was guilty. Jekyll was no worse, and he would wake with his conscience seemingly unimpaired. He would even make haste where possible to undo the evil done by Hyde. And thus his conscience slumbered. Some 2 months before the death of Sir Danvers, I was out on one of my adventures and had returned at a late hour. I woke the next morning to somewhat odd sensations. I had woken in that little room in Soho, where I had been accustomed to sleep in the body of Edward Hyde. Now the hand of Henry Jekyll was professional in shape and size. But the hand which I now saw was lean, corded, and knuckly. It was the hand of Edward Hyde. Terror awoke inside me as sudden and startling as the crash of cymbals. Yes, I had gone to bed, Dr. Jekyll, but I had awoken Edward Hyde. Not 10 minutes later, Dr. Jekyll had returned to his own shape. The power of the drug had not always been equally displayed. Once it had totally failed me, and since then I had obliged on more than one occasion to double the amount. These rare uncertainties cast hitherto a sole shadow on my contentment. All things therefore seemed to point to this, that I was slowly losing hold of my original and better self, and slowly becoming incorporated with my second and worse. Between these two, I now felt I had to choose. To cast in my lot with Jekyll was to die to those aspirations and desires that I had of late began to pamper. But to cast it in with Hyde was to die to 1,000 aspirations and to become at a blow and forever despised and friendless. Choice might appear unequal, but there was still another consideration in the scales, for while Dr. Jekyll would suffer smartingly in the fires of abstinence, Hyde would not even be aware of all that he had lost. Yes, I preferred the doctor, surrounded by friends, cherishing honest hopes, and I bid a resolute farewell those desires and freedoms that I had engaged in the act of Hyde. For 2 months, I was true to my determination. I began to be tortured by throes and longings as of Hyde struggling after freedom. And at last, in an hour of moral weakness, I once again compounded and swallowed the transforming drop. My devil had long been caged, and he came out roaring. I had voluntarily stripped myself of all those balancing instincts by which even the worst of us gets to balance amongst temptation. And in my case, to be tempted, however slightly, was to fall. Instantly, the spirit of hell awoke in me. With glee, I mauled the unresisting body, taking delight from every blow. And it wasn't until the pains began to secede that I felt a terror in my breast. Before the transformation had even finished tearing Hyde, Dr. Jekyll, with tears, gratitude, and remorse, had fallen before God on his knees and lifted his hands in prayer. The next morning came the news that the guilt of Hyde was patent to the world. Jekyll was now my city of refuge. Let Hyde keep up for just an instant, and the hands of men would be raised to take and slay him. This last condescension to my evil finally destroyed the balance of my soul. I sat in the sun on a bench, the animal within me licking the chops of memory. And at that very moment, a qualm came over me, a horrid nausea, a grinding in the bones, and a most deadly shuddering. I began to be aware of a change in the temper of my thoughts. A greater boldness, a contempt for danger, a solution to the bonds of obligation. I was once more Edward Hyde. A moment before I had been safe, of all men's respect, wealthy, beloved. And now I was a stranger, houseless, friendless. My drugs were in the presses of my cabinet, but how was I to reach them? If I sought to enter by the house, my own servants would consign me to the gallows. I saw I must employ the help of another, and I thought of Lanyon. Hyde composed his two important letters, one to Lanyon and the other to Poole. Hyde, I say. I cannot say I. That child of hell had nothing human about him. Nothing lived in him but fear and hatred. When I came to myself at Lanyon, the horror of my friend perhaps affected me somewhat. A change had come over me. It was no longer the horror of the gallows that was my greatest fear. It was the horror of being Hyde. I awoke in the morning once more at home, in my own house and close to my drugs, and the gratitude for my escape shone so brightly in my soul that it almost rivaled the brightness of hope. From that day forth, it seemed only under the immediate stimulation of the drug that I was able to maintain the countenance of Jekyll. At any hour, day and night, if I dozed or even slept for one moment in my chair, then I would awake in the body of Hyde. Under this strain of my condemning doom and by the sleeplessness to which I now condemn myself, I became overtaken by fever. Languidly weak in body and mind, and solely occupied by one thought: the horror of my other self. The strength of Hyde had only seemed to grow stronger in the sickliness of Jekyll. And certainly the hate that now divided the two was equal on each side. With Jekyll, it was a thing of vital instinct. The hatred of Hyde for Jekyll was of a different order. His terror of the gallows drove him to continually commit temporary suicide and to return to his subordinate station of a part instead of a person. But he loathed the necessity. He loathed the despondency into which Jekyll had now fallen, and he hated the dislike with which he was himself regarded. Had it not been for his fear of death, he would long ago have ruined himself in order to involve me in the ruin. But his love of life is wonderful. I, who sicken and freeze at the mere thought of him when I think of that objection and the passion of that attachment. When I know how he fears my power to cut him off by suicide, find it in my heart to pity him. It is useless, and the time awfully fails me to prolong this. My punishment might have gone on for years, but for that last calamity which has now fallen. My provision of the salt, which had never been renewed since the date of the first experiment, began to run low. I sent out for a fresh supply and mixed the draught, but it was without efficiency. You will hear how I have had London ransacked. It was in vain. I am now persuaded that my first supply of the salt was impure, and it was that unknown impurity which led efficiency to the drop. I am now finishing this statement under the last of the old powders. This, then, is the last time, short of a miracle, that Henry Jekyll can think his own thoughts or see his own face. Nor must I delay too long to bring my writing to an end, for if my narrative has hitherto escaped destruction, it has been by a combination of great prudence and great luck. Should the throes of change take me in the act of writing it, Hyde will tear it in pieces. Half an hour from now, I will once again re-undo that hated personality. God knows I'm careless. This is my true hour of death, and what is to follow concerns another than myself. Here then, as I lay down the pen and proceed to seal up my confession, I bring that life of unhappy Henry Jekyll to an end.
Jekyll, I demand to see you. I give you fair warning, our suspicions are aroused, and I must and shall see you. If not by fair means, then by foul. If not by your consent, then by brute force. Down with the door! We've come too late. Hyde has gone to his account, and it only remains to find the body of your master.
Must be buried here.
Or he may have fled.
This is the same drug that I was always bringing him.
What could Jekyll want with it?
The final will and testament of Henry Jekyll.
In case of death, and as a deed of gift, in case of disappearance, all my possessions are to pass into the hands of
G.J. Utterson. Hyde has been in possession all these days. He must have raged to see himself displaced. And he has not destroyed this document. Jekyll must have been alive and here this day. He cannot have been disposed of in so short a space. He must be alive. He must have fled. And in that case, can we venture to declare this suicide? He may yet involve your master in some dire catastrophe.
The final confession of Henry Jekyll.
Why don't you read it, sir?
Because I fear.
I fear.